Shalom, I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to be sharing with you regarding the current status of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, as well as the current situation with Syria and Iran. First, the peace process. In order to agree to restart direct peace talks with Israel, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has given the following demands. Number one, Israel must present the Palestinians with a map for a Palestinian state based upon 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Number two, Israel must stop building Jewish homes in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Number three, Israel must transfer parts of Area C in the West Bank, which is under full Israeli control, to the Palestinians. Number four, Israel must agree to refrain from withholding in the future any monthly Palestinian tax revenues collected by Israel. Number five, Israel must immediately release Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. However, Israel has refused to meet these preconditions, saying that doing so would weaken its negotiating position. In any agreement with the Palestinians, Israel insists that it must include the following. Number one, a demilitarized Palestinian state. Number two, that the Palestinians waive the right of return. Number three, that the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state. And number four, that Israel's security needs are met by having military control over the Jordan Valley. This week's news events is as follows. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has gained the consent of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to run peace negotiations on two separate tracks simultaneously. The first is between Israel and the Palestinians, and secondly, between Israel and the Arab League. Kerry says that more work needs to be done before a starting date can be established, but he hopes that talks can begin this summer. Kerry's strategy is based upon issues which were communicated to him in talks with Netanyahu and Abbas in his recent visits to the Middle East. The 2002 Saudi peace plan, which became known as the Arab Peace Initiative, calls for total Israeli withdrawal to the pre-1967 borders in return for peace and normal relations with the Arab world. Netanyahu told Kerry that if this demand remained on the table, that peace talks would quickly turn into a stalemate. Meanwhile, Abbas told Kerry that comprehensive Arab backing was imperative for him to consent to re-enter peace talks with Israel. As a result, Kerry invited a group of prominent Arab foreign ministers, heads of the Arab Peace Initiative Follow-Up Committee, to visit the United States to discuss the major issues standing in the way of an Arab peace deal with Israel. Among those present were Qatari Prime Minister Hamad bin Jassim, chair of the Arab Peace Initiative Follow-Up Committee, Arab League Chairman Nabil al-Arabi, and Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki. After putting before them Netanyahu's objections to the Arab Peace Initiative, Kerry was able to persuade the Arab ministers to accept President Barack Obama's formulation, which provides for an Israeli return to the 1967 borders with comparable and mutual agreed minor swaps of the land. The Palestinian response to the Arab Peace Initiative modification was as follows. Palestinian chief negotiator Saeb Erekat said that the initiative reflected the Palestinian position in support of minor land swaps with Israel. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad Maliki, who was a part of the Arab delegation that met with Kerry, was also quoted as saying that the proposal had been made in coordination with the Palestinians. Muhammad Shataya, a Palestinian negotiator and top Fatah representative, said that it was premature to talk about the idea of land swaps with Israel. Shataya said that any land swaps should come as a result of negotiations with Israel. He said that any future land swaps should be equal in size and value. For each centimeter the Palestinians give up, we should get a centimeter in return. Shataya expressed concern that Israel would interpret the Arab proposal as permission to annex the large Jewish settlement blocks in the West Bank. This is a dangerous matter because we consider all settlements to be illegal and should be removed as an obstacle to peace. We want Israel to give. The Arabs are not required to give. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas expects that the United States would exercise pressure on Israel to accept resuming peace talks on the basis of pre-1967 border lines with the slight exchange of land. Meanwhile, Hamas, who controls the Gaza Strip, rejected a revised Middle East peace initiative put forward by the Arab League, saying outsiders could not decide the fate of the Palestinians. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh said the so-called New Arab Initiative is rejected by Hamas, by the Palestinians, and no one can accept it. The initiative contains numerous dangers to our people in the occupied land of 1967, 1948, and to our people in exile. To those who speak of land swaps, we say, Palestine is not a property. It is not for sale, not for a swap, and cannot be traded. Two other Palestinian organizations, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, two groups that oppose the peace process with Israel, also rejected the land trade idea. Meanwhile, Israel objects to key elements of the Arab Peace Initiative, which calls for Israel to return to the pre-1967 borders, the inclusion of East Jerusalem as the capital of a Palestinian state, and the return of Palestinian refugees to what is now Israel. The core issues that need to be settled in any peace agreement include borders, the fate of the Palestinian refugees, the future of Jewish settlements in the West Bank, and the status of Jerusalem. Israel's response to the modification of the Arab Peace Initiative was as follows. Israel Justice Minister Tzipi Livni, who heads peace negotiations with the Palestinians, called the Arab League announcement very positive news. She expressed hope that this change by the Arab League would help get the Palestinians to return to negotiations and send a message to the Israeli public that an agreement with the Palestinians would lead to normalization of ties with the entire Arab world. Livni met with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in the United States following the Arab League announcement. Yitzhak Molko, Netanyahu's envoy to the peace process, accompanied Livni to her meeting with Kerry. Molko has visited the United States frequently over the past few weeks. Molko presented Kerry with Netanyahu's objections to the Arab League plan, including fears that the United States would adopt its language stipulating only minor land swaps that don't include the large Jewish settlement blocks in the West Bank. Netanyahu said that he's eager to sign a peace deal, but noted that any agreement would need to ensure Israeli security and that the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict didn't start in 1967, nor with the construction of the first settlements in the West Bank. The purpose of the future agreement with the Palestinians is to prevent the eventuality of a bi-national state and to guarantee stability and security. The root of the conflict with the Palestinians is the Palestinians' refusal to recognize the Jews' right to a country. Israel, while perfectly willing to sit down to talks, has to make sure that at the end of negotiations, it will be clear it is the end of the conflict of Palestinian demands and that there is recognition for our nation state. It's not about a Palestinian state, it's about a Jewish state. Netanyahu added that only the Israeli army can provide Israel with the security it needs in any peace agreement. An international peacekeeping force is not acceptable as a peace agreement doesn't necessarily bring security. Finally, Netanyahu said that in any peace agreement with the Palestinians, Israelis would have a chance to voice their opinions of it in a national referendum. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad Malki announced that the Palestinian Authority had pledged to the United States that it would freeze its efforts to join the United Nations agencies or turn to the International Criminal Court until June the 4th. Malki said that the promise was made to U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry as a gesture on part of the Palestinians, and in order to prove our true intentions, to give a bigger chance to the peace process. Malki said that the Palestinian Authority decision was aimed at proving our good intentions and belief in making relentless efforts to achieve peace with Israel on the basis of a two-state solution. The final bit of news from Israel this week is that Israeli Knesset member Moshe Feiglin, a member of Netanyahu's Likud party, said that he would not vote with the Likud at the Knesset as a way of protesting Netanyahu from preventing him from going up on the Temple Mount. Feiglin has made it his cause to regularly go up on the Temple Mount on a monthly basis. Next, I'd like to share with you the current situation with Syria, and it is as follows. In response to reports that the Syrian government of President Bashar Assad has used chemical weapons against the government opposition in Syria's civil war, the U.S. military is preparing for the possibility of an aerial or sea missile attack on Syrian chemical weapon sites. A senior U.S. administration official said that there is intensified planning in the works. The U.S. is discussing possibly using ground troops to secure the Syrian chemical weapon sites. However, a missile strike on Syria is far more likely than the U.S. using any ground troops in the conflict. What makes any military task challenging is that Syrian chemical stockpiles are constantly being moved around the country to avoid being located. U.S. President Barack Obama has not asked for any strike options yet, but the U.S. Pentagon is preparing all military options in case they are needed. Recently, Egyptian and Iranian government officials are meeting to discuss the growing concern that the U.S. may choose to conduct a military option against Syria. A senior Egyptian diplomat said, "There are serious moves being made by the U.S. that imply an imminent strike on Damascus." While the U.S. may be preparing for an aerial strike on Syria's chemical weapons sites, it is being reported, as this broadcast is being made, that an Israeli aerial attack has been made against targets in Syria, including a chemical weapons depot outside of the capital city of Damascus. An Israeli spokesman confirmed only an airstrike in Syria against a shipment of long-range surface missiles. We will continue to watch further details of this development. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel said that the United States is rethinking its opposition to arming the Syrian rebels. However, giving weapons to the forces fighting President Bashar Assad was only one option being considered by the United States to remove Assad from power. In potentially arming the Syrian rebels, Hagel cautioned that it carries the risk of arms finding their way into the hands of anti-American extremists among the insurgents, such as the Nusra Front. Hagel said, "You look and rethink all options that are available to you. It doesn't mean that you do or will choose to use them, though." Finally, I'd like to share with you the current situation with Iran. It is as follows. According to the Wall Street Journal, the United States has upgraded its biggest bunker buster bomb specifically to enable the destruction of Iran's underground Fordo uranium enrichment plant near the city of Qom. U.S. officials have shown video footage to Israel of the bunker buster in action and explained the advanced features which have been added. The bunker buster, known as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, is 30,000 pounds and has been improved with adjusted fuses to maximize its burrowing power, upgraded guidance systems to improve its precision, and high-tech equipment intended to allow it to evade Iranian air defenses in order to reach and destroy the Fordo nuclear enrichment complex. The United States believes that by showing Israel its upgraded bunker buster bomb, that it will convince Israel that the United States will indeed prevent Iran from attaining nuclear weapons. Well, that's going to conclude this week's report. In this week's report, we shared with you the following. Regarding the peace process, the Arab League put forth a modified view of the original 2002 Saudi peace plan, saying it was now permissible to accept a Palestinian state based upon the 1967 borders with agreed-upon minor land swaps with Israel. The United States called this a major breakthrough, and Israel's chief negotiator in the peace process, Tzipi Livni, called it welcome news. This new Arab League proposal was coordinated with the Palestinian Authority. However, Hamas, who controls the Gaza Strip, rejected it. While viewing this as a positive step, Israel is concerned that it will still not allow for Israel to annex the large settlement blocks in the West Bank as a part of any peace deal with the Palestinians. Also, Netanyahu said the root cause of the conflict with the Palestinians is not over land, but rather the Palestinians' acceptance of Israel as a Jewish state. Until we do it again, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.